Zizek proves the boundaries of his thinking. He says this sometimes when ridiculed by Judith Butler, for instance, as not being a radical, um, by enunciating the question, what about the morning after? Two ships have passed in the night. There's been a coup d'etat. There's been a revolution. The TV stations are taking over. The media is in the control of someone else. But Zizek wants to know in advance. This marks the difference between Foucauldian thinking and Zizek. Zizek wants to know in advance, what will the program be? What will how will we schedule our days after the takeover of the media? So the notion, which is so abhorrent to the planning spirit, is that something which is unforeseeable would be produced through, as it were, breaking up the current table of values, as Nietzsche would put it, the Virta, the so-called highest values, or the tablet of the Ten Commandments, let's say, or the word of Christ, love one another, the overcoming of the mere posited law to the intelligence of man, but to the thing said to the full man. Somehow everything already known would be set aside, and the notion of decay or justice as already known would simply no longer be available. So let's clarify here. If we're speaking in a radical way, we are not speaking in the sense of Chomsky saying, oh, people just, they would be like me if only they knew what I knew, or someone saying, if only things could be set right, this program or daily schedule, which we already have, could be set in place and everything would be fine. Rather, they're saying the experiment is therefore a radical experiment. So if that's so, we have to measure it against what has, I suppose it's a self-contradiction to say that we could measure it against the past. So, and even against this du kannst den du sollst, you ought to, so you can. You ought to, so you can. I think Obama had misapplied that saying, if you can, you must. It's Kantian notion. But Kant is really saying there's something we know to be good, for instance, that human beings should never lie. And this must, as it were, the system of nature must allow for this to be realized. And even if it takes 3 million years, human beings, or whatever human beings are, once they get there, maybe almost pure spiritual beings, will realize this. It must be realized because it ought to be so. What does it mean then to go beyond all such positing ahead of time the notion that there's a wager of some sort? Turgenev, Fathers and Sons, the character who is a Russian nihilist in the sense that putting out the eye of the sun, blackening the world, and then through electricity, which is to say through something understood by human beings, through something which is purely human. We think of Dilthey, says Dilthey, who clarifies Vico, who says that if we can understand that, that's truly human. In a certain way, replacing Thomas Aquinas, who thinks the truly human thing is to have a choice. So we replace the fall of man and the ability to choose between good and evil with um, the claim to have knowledge as real human direct understanding, as though we would, just as somebody who was face blind would become possessed of the ability to distinguish faces, we would become possessed of the ability to know the right way to order the human world, and in fact, the world as such. The Russian nihilism is then this idea that just destroy everything and then start over. So there's that, and there's the notion of that combined with the claim that there's two kinds of men, the Hamlet type and the Don Quixote type, in Turgenev's essay, saying that there's this one type that's that corresponds to the European and the Goethean, Faustian, so-called Faustian type, and then there's other type that corresponds to the spirit of the East, which I would say Dostoevsky participated in. So it's often said that Dostoevsky was against socialism. He was against the French socialism, Fourierism. But was he actually against Marxism? So no, because he never heard of it. But that's a little bit beside the point. The point is more that the project of Lenin and Turgenev was already known to Dostoevsky and in fact endorsed by him. So the people that say Dostoevsky was against Marx are actually saying Dostoevsky was against Fourierism and the example of the Crystal Palace and the London Exposition and all that. But what was superficially being called Marxism, because Lenin, of course, studied Marx some, and even Stalin wrote articles claiming to be Marxist articles, but is Stalin, follow the reasoning of that? We think Stalin's a pretty shifty individual. He tells us something and we just take his word for it. So is Stalin a Marxist just because he says that he's a Marxist? Rather, there's something called the SRs, the Soviet revolutionaries, that go back to Dostoevsky's time. And there were political assassinations going on for like 50 years, 60 years prior to prior to the SR revolution. The Bolsheviks were a tiny minority among the SRs. They happened to win out through, say, cybernetic ability at organizing, let's call it. Lenin was a genius for organization and for tactical matters, getting things done. So he managed to win out. But the bulk of the people were people called the SRs, who were basically already known to Dostoevsky, and Dostoevsky was in a certain fateful way in favor of them. Well, I'll let you judge for yourself whether he's in favor of them or not. So the evidence is this: there was a common saying in Dostoevsky's time, which was if you were to hear that there was an assassination attempt underway to kill the Tsar, would you intervene? Would you tell the Tsar's guard or the police or some official or so on? Would you intervene? And Dostoevsky himself, in a letter, which he must have known could have been intercepted by the censors and looked at, in a letter he wrote that no, he wouldn't. So the way I interpret this is this: in being one of the body of people who are Russians, Dostoevsky had to realize that he was destined to actually further this revolution, which was not. So again, this revolution wasn't conceived of as a socialist revolution, as a Marxist revolution, as a anything Western. It just got a lot of those terms put over it, and one can see perfectly well that it doesn't fit with Marx's plan, because Marx's plan was people's, the public opinion, let's call it, will change because of the conditions of industrial society, and then naturally the demand for democracy, quote unquote dictatorship of the proletariat, will supersede the demand for better governance by a hierarchical structure. So that's his vision. But there was no industrial society in Russia. So the only way Lenin could do that is by changing the notion, saying we'll take over and then we'll re-educate people. So that instead of them getting that feeling for democracy through the experience of the industrialization and being made into atomized workers, instead we'll directly implant it in them through education or re-education, or with the help of propaganda and so on. Let me end this with a question. So does that mean that there are two positions or three? There's the position that we have to know what the plan is already from within our current horizon. So apparently that's the Zizek position. Or is there only one second position, the Foucauldian position, that we have to charge in without knowing what it will bring about? Or is it that there's multiple positions that have involved the theory of the Russian nihilists and Turgenev and other similar theories about, and possibly including Foucault himself, about what it means to go into something without already knowing what the outcome is meant to be?